Hey, Sven.
Hey, Leo.
So glad to have you on to another episode of Empower Apps. My name is Leo Dion. Today we're joined by Sven Schmidt, co-creator, co-maintainer of the Swift Package Index, creator of Arena, a Swift package playground generator. How did I do with that intro? Pretty good?
Yeah, yeah, that's great.
What did I miss?
Well, I think those are the things that are probably best known. I've got another app as well, Hummingbird, that's not on the App Store, and I've got an Xcode extension which is on the Mac App Store. But yeah, that pretty much sums it up.
Ooh, Xcode extension. We should chat about that later. I didn't know that because that's something I'm interested in, but it always seems like a real challenge to get those working and get them out.
Totally, yes. Today I had to help Dave to get it up and running again because Xcode, especially if you have multiple versions of Xcode running, it just keeps forgetting about the extensions all the time.
So today I wanted to talk about the Swift Package Index. We had Tim on a few weeks ago just talking about the state of server-side Swift in 2020 and 2021. So I wanted to kind of get an idea of like a real-world scenario of maintaining a site like this, as well as kind of getting into the nitty-gritty of Swift packages and how those work. So I'll let you start about the story regarding Swift Package Index, how that started with you and Dave, and what you found has helped it work, and what are some challenges you've run into maintaining that site.
So yeah, the way that started was last spring, and I think there's a good summary of that on John Sandel's podcast, actually, who was kind enough to invite us just after I launched, where I told a bit of the backstory of it. I contacted Dave in spring with an idea to integrate Arena with his Swift package index. At the time, it was called swiftpm.co. And my idea was to tie Arena into his site such that people could click a button and explore a package in a Swift playground. Just a one-click thing to get a third-party dependency embedded in a playground. And I pitched that idea to him. And what turned out then, we ended up rewriting his swiftpm.co in Vapor. That's something he was sort of thinking about doing at the time, and I had free time to look into it, and that's how this project really started. And as I joked at John Sandel's podcast, the thing we managed was launch the site but not embed the button. So that's certainly still something on our to-do list.
I highly recommend checking that episode out from earlier this summer. Really great summary of Swift Package Index. A lot of great insight from Dave too. I really love that episode. John did a good job. So I'll put that in the show notes for you to get some more background on the Swift Package Index and that story. What have you found are some like pet peeves that you've had with trying to, because you've done a lot with like showing the different support that these packages have as far as like what OSs they support and what versions of Swift they support as well. What are some pet peeves you have with like maintaining this site and allowing other people to add their Swift packages, or mistakes that people make, I guess?
I'm not sure I'd go so far as mistakes people make. It's just that when you build 3,600 packages or try and build them across, we've got 32 language and platform combinations that we build for, you run invariably into issues that aren't anyone's fault really. It's just, the number of combinations that you're looking at that surface things that go wrong. And apart from trying to figure out in the first place how you can build across these 32 combinations with a simple build script, which is actually a Swift package itself that does the building, that took quite some time to figure out, and we had some help along the way to get us there. But once we had that figured out, there were still some things that we just couldn't solve on our own. One of those is, for instance, on watchOS. So what happens when you try to build something with Xcode, a Swift package with Xcode? It auto creates a scheme. And when I say Xcode, I mean Xcode build from the command line. Mm-hmm. It auto creates a scheme, and normally that works fine. But in the case of watchOS targets, if there are tests, this auto-created scheme will also try and build the tests. but XCTest isn't available on
right.
watchOS. So those all failed when we first did this. Now, there might have been ways for us to try and guess the correct scheme by looking at what they're named and find schemes that are in the project files. But that is sort of, you don't want to introduce a lot of heuristics if you're doing something that finicky to begin with. So what we chose to do instead is just add a little manifest file, an SPI manifest file, a YAML file where package authors can define what scheme we should pick up and build for on certain targets, on certain platforms. And that can be, or is typically used for watchOS, but can be used for any platform and Swift version combination, really.
Yeah, I remember talking about that in a Spain talk about the example of the point free. One of their packages, they use that to specify that you can test out watchOS. And the whole testing on watchOS thing is a strange oversight. I'm not sure why Apple doesn't support that yet, but yeah, that's an interesting way to get around that.
Yeah, that certainly helped us, and helped the package authors to get that box to green. It's really interesting how authors have picked this up and are trying to make the builds work. I mean, if their package supports the platform, and in some cases, I mean, I had a couple of packages that really. Seeing that matrix incentivized me to go in and see, well, can I get this to green? Can I get this to show as supported? And often it's not that much work to actually get it to pass. And it's nice to have that whole matrix green, all the Swift versions and platforms potentially.
I don't know if I've mentioned this, but I'm a shields.io addict. You've probably seen a few of my GitHub readmes. So yeah, it's like, oh, I got to get them all green. I got to get A+ on my code quality. So yeah, I totally understand that.
Do you know that we actually support shields.io? So we can generate supported Swift versions on supported platforms so that you can reflect in your README what we show on the site?
That's awesome. I'm so happy about that. That's fantastic. I'm glad now our audience knows that. Because yeah, I know there's a way to implement that. So good job getting that working. Hey folks, I wanted to let you know about Linode. Linode is one of my favorite cloud server tools out there as far as hosting is concerned. You may have seen my latest project, Orchard Nest, where I have built a website completely in Swift for showcasing some of the latest and greatest blog posts, podcasts, and videos in the Swift community. And that site is completely hosted on Linode. In fact, I can tell you that the server is in Newark, but they have servers all around the world, everywhere from Toronto to Mumbai. So you can set up anywhere, or you can set up load balancing and share your site everywhere as well. But it has been a really fantastic tool in building Orchard Nest, and it really does a great job showing me like various CPU usage and IP4 traffic, IP6 traffic, disk IO, etc. It's been awesome, and it's been consistently running great. And I think it's a really great, you get a lot for your price, especially for developers who really want to build stuff hands-on and get the developer tools they need to start their brand new server project. So go ahead and give Linode a shot. The link to Linode is in the show notes below. Use that to let them know that you heard about Linode from this show. They've been awesome. I've really enjoyed hosting Orchard Nest on Linode at orchardnest.com. It's been fantastic. They have all sorts of great tools. Get yourself a nice, simple Ubuntu server and start working on that Vapor application you want to today using Linode. Again, use a link in the show notes below to let them know you heard about Linode from us, and hopefully you can get started on your new project today. So the other thing that I've run into, we've chatted about this offline, is being able to support Docker images. I ran into a really interesting issue where apparently I needed the SSL package installed for MistKit. So you not only can specify schemes for watchOS, but you can specify Docker images, correct?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, and you weren't the first one to require OS level dependencies in your Docker image. And the way we build for Linux is we just use the default Swift images for the various Swift versions, and they come with just the base level dependencies. And if you need anything beyond, typically when you set up your own CI, you have control over that, and you can add dependencies by running apt-get install in your build steps. But obviously we don't allow that, and we can't either foresee all the various dependencies people might need. So the way we've solved this for now is we allow you to specify a Docker image, another base image that you can use, that we will pick up to build. Now, there's one thing to bear in mind. We just don't accept any image. So if you want to use this, you would need to let us know, so that we can list those images, because obviously, with Docker images, you can run all sorts of things in that we would then run on top of.
Right.
So we need a bit of an insight of what gets added and what gets run.
So, like I said, we talked about Vapor in our previous episode with Tim. What are some packages that you use to keep the site running smoothly, besides just, Vapor or Fluent or whatever server-side plugins you might be using? What do you use for more of the maintenance of the site?
Yeah, so there's really two areas where we invest to keep the site running, and obviously, we want to keep that low overhead, as it's just us two working on it and operating on it. And it isn't just a website, right? Because we're also running these builders all the time. So it's a bit more than just a web page. And that's the two areas are site ops, like site operations, and testing. One is after deployment fact and monitoring. The one is before deployment to make sure that the deployments themselves are all right. And the packages are, in the testing area, it's snapshot testing, and that's Point3Co's snapshot testing package, which is just fantastic. It really helps us to test things broadly and highlight things that change in areas that are quite critical. So, for instance, where we use it is we snapshot test our HTML pages, and that's both structurally, so the HTML itself, and the rendering. So like we render PNGs of the page, what it looks like both in desktop and in mobile views. And that really helps to ensure that we aren't inadvertently breaking the layout or what it looks like. Now, it's unfortunately not perfect because it's really hard to get CSS to load into those snapshots. So there's a couple of areas where we're not capturing the full fidelity of it, but it really helps to highlight changes that are happening.
How are you rendering the HTML, if you might mind me asking?
So Point3Co comes with that. It has ways to bring up, I think it's using a UI view under the hood, where it loads the WebKit view. I mean, where it renders the page and then snapshots that out. And the difficulty with getting the CSS to load is because of the security settings in loading additional resources into that page. I don't have the details in front of me right now, but it's really hard to bless
I'd imagine
paths to get that to load properly.
And is that are you using Leaf or Publish underneath, or what are you doing to actually render the HTML on the web?
No, we're using an HTML DSL, and we're using John Sandel's Ink framework.
Sorry, Ink, yes. When I say Publish, sorry, yeah. And I really like Ink. I've actually used that for my new site, Orchard Nest, that uses Ink as well, and I've really liked that.
Yeah. It works really well for us. It's really fast. It's been really helped with Xcode 12 and the better autocomplete and just handling of large nested structures.
Yes.
Because that used to break a lot under Xcode 11.
What are you doing as far as because you mentioned speed, what are you doing to make sure that the HTML is as fast as it can be? Are you doing any sort of caching or anything like that?
No, not at the moment, because in all our testing, it's been really fast.
Okay.
The thing that makes page loading slow is that we're fetching a couple of things from external resources. So
Yeah, I'd
we've
imagine that.
we've started adding the readmes to the package pages, and that is the biggest slowdown on that page, because we're fetching the data of that readme and then display it on the page and render it in Markdown to HTML. So that's the slowdown on that page. That page before that was super fast. The only page that was really slow was one that had 200 library targets, and fetching that from the database was slow. But the HTML display itself is super fast. I benchmarked Leaf against HTML DSLs quite a while ago, and it's a lot faster than rendering templates.
So you were talking about snapshot testing. What other libraries are you using for testing?
I don't think we're using anything in particular, just the normal built-in XT-test. Obviously, Vapor extensions that come with Vapor to make testing easier or possible, like database access. We do use point-free codes as well, a technique to do a dependency injection, which is a bit, I guess, uncommon in that it's a global where you inject functions to render your dependencies, and that's worked fantastically well. It allows really easily to stub out.
Is this their composable architecture library?
No, that's a standalone thing. I don't think it's even. I mean, it's not really a project, because all you do is you declare a struct with functions in it, and then you replace the functions at runtime. And in dev, you have a var struct which you can actually modify, and in production, it's a let struct which you can't modify, and that sort of ensures that you don't mess with your dependencies in production code. But in debug builds, you have all the options available to you to replace any generator for a dependency. Like, for instance, date. We use date as an injected dependency, where we have a method void to date that can generate the current date. And normally you just use date.init as the generator of that. And in our test code, we can supply a hard-coded date closure that generates a given date.
Yeah, no, I totally understand what you're talking about. I do this quite a bit with my initializers, where I'll take in a certain dependency, which gives you the option of overriding it. But when you actually run the code, it typically runs whatever my only implementation is. And it allows essentially for like plugging in mocks. So that way you don't have to like do the real work of calling a database or a network or things like that.
Yeah. The slight difference is with their approach, they have a global, typically called current, that you use as the entry point. So instead of using date in it, you do current date. So it's not dependency injected on whichever module you're using. It's sort of a big singleton that you're accessing to get your dependencies.
Awesome. That sounds really interesting. We'll post a link to that tutorial in our show notes. I wanted to mention something you've talked a lot about when it comes to testing, smoke testing. What does that exactly mean? And what are you doing as far as the site is concerned when it comes to that?
So smoke testing is testing after deployment that your basic functionality is all right, that you haven't broken something. And in a previous project, I started doing that automatically after every deploy. And that was a project which involved also logins and, basic user functionality, creating certain entities on the server, that sort of thing, navigating through views. And what I did for that project is I wrote a little tool which is called Resta, which allows you to, it's sort of a YAML-based DSL where you can specify web requests that you're making. That can also, it's sort of like a program. They can reference previous requests, so you can easily instrument a login process. And what it effectively does after a deployment, it creates a user, it logs in that user, has that user do something, update some records, and check that the updates are reflected. That sort of smoke tests very basic functionality to ensure that you're not doing that one thing that you really want to avoid, that basic functionality is broken by a deployment that you just made. And it also happens on the on the live service as much as possible, just to ensure, because unit testing often covers all the bits and pieces, but what often happens is that deployment hasn't been tested end to end, right? I mean, the integration part is sometimes where things go wrong, and that's often harder to test. So the smoke test is another layer of ensuring that everything is still working as intended. Maybe not as much in detail as a unit test does, or surely not, but at a very high level, that basic functionality is
the basic
there.
Integration between the different services and things like that.
Yeah, exactly. And in case of the Swift package index, what we do is we use that same tool to ping some pages after deployment to ensure, we're not returning 404s all of a sudden where they shouldn't be happening.
One of the things I talked about with Tim when it comes to like the different server packages was metrics. And it seems like you're doing something with metrics as well and using that Swift metrics package. Could you kind of explain how you're using it and how it's been helpful to you?
Yeah, so this is the site ops part that I mentioned earlier as ways to ensure the site's working well. So the testing is a sort of pre-deployment, making sure those are all right. And the site ops is after the fact, just ongoing monitoring. And for that, we use the combination of Prometheus and Grafana. Prometheus is a time series database for metrics, application level metrics, where you can monitor your system. And Grafana is a web dashboard and system for showing graphs of what you have and alerting. And these are pretty standard. So lots of packages or things come with Prometheus metrics built in, and Vapor is one of those things that can be instrumented in such a way if you add I'm not sure I think the package is called either Vapor Prometheus or Prometheus metrics. And what that does, if you add that package, you automatically get an endpoint in your Vapor app that Prometheus can scrape, because Prometheus works by scraping certain parts of the system that you pointed to for metrics. So it pulls metrics rather than have it pushed to it. And by default, if you add that to Vapor, that includes like request level metrics, like request timings and such. But you can also add application level metrics by exposing certain metrics that you're interested in. Like we, for instance, post how many builds there are just being pushed, how many build candidates there are, how many packages we've just analyzed or ingested, that sort of thing. And then you can gather all this up and put it in a Grafana dashboard, individually or together. And it shows a really nice picture of what's going on in your system and shows you, how things are progressing and if there are any issues.
That's something I should definitely take a look at. I'm really interested in that and trying to get metrics up and going. So yeah, I'll definitely take a look at Swift Prometheus and Swift metrics. So besides serving up this site and the web pages and things like that, one part that is kind of hidden underneath but does a lot of heavy lifting is the continuous integration setup. What are you doing for that as far as getting the site up and running, and where are you hosting the site and things like that?
Right. So there we sort of do two things in parallel, and that's partly historic and partly just because it's pragmatic. We use GitHub CI for our everyday development process. So we run GitHub Action on the SPI server package whenever we make any changes, and that runs through our normal unit tests, like Swift test and gates, whether we can merge or not. Separate from that, we use GitLab for deployment. And the purpose of that is to auto-deploy various things to our environments. And the way that works is that any merge into the default branch gets auto-deployed to staging without any further interaction. And any tag that we set on any revision gets auto-deployed to dev and staging and production. And that's what GitLab is for, because it made that really easy. I had quite a bit of experience from a previous project to set that up quickly. So that's what we're running with right now. And I believe it's still more capable than GitHub Actions are at this time. The other thing that allows is have sort of a push button deployment of any revision to staging that we've added. So if we're working on a feature and we have it on a branch and we want to deploy that that revision to staging, it's literally a click on a single button in the GitLab UI, and you can deploy that revision to staging to check it out. And equally, it's easy to roll back because it's just, you just deploy a back version, and that does everything, including database migrations and rollbacks, and that's been super helpful during development.
Nice. So you think like the reason you're still using GitLab is more because of the advanced stuff you set up when it comes to deployment?
Definitely, yeah. I believe it's not quite on par yet on GitHub. I haven't checked in a while, but I mean, it's working for us. The only downside is that we need to mirror the repository over to GitLab, but that's not a huge issue really.
How do you do the mirroring, if you mind me asking?
That's just a setup in GitLab. You can tell it to refresh from a source repository, and then it just pulls in. The downside is it's not quite immediate, so there can be a bit of delay, which you can obviously manually override by just pushing to GitLab in parallel.
Right.
Other than that, it's just another origin, really.
Yeah, I've actually started doing some work on GitLab. I've always been using GitLab for client projects. That's just what my clients use typically. But I really like GitLab, and I'm trying to use my old MacBook Pro as a CI machine too, and getting that set up. But it seems really solid when it comes to like private repos, as opposed to like GitHub. And I like the fact that you can host your own CI machine locally and things like that.
Yeah, GitLab's really great, especially the visual aspects of managing your pipelines, which is what GitHub Actions are called over in GitLab land.
GitLab land.
You can set up really nice integration environments and have like really visual stages of deployment and gate them behind manual actions. So you can set up really nice dashboards for deployments that I haven't seen working in GitHub quite the same way.
Yeah. I think GitHub is good for a lot of open source projects. The CI stuff, it's pretty easy to get that working, especially with Swift packages. But yeah, there's a lot more robust stuff on GitLab that you can do, and it's essentially free if you're hosting your own CI, anyways. So that's what I found the big benefit. So let's talk a bit about your recent article you had about running Docker on Apple Silicon, which has been kind of a headache for me, being able to do that. Surprisingly, I've ended up actually moving a lot of the Docker stuff over to GitLab, because if I do anything on my M1, I can't really test it. So I let GitLab do it for me. But I'll let you go ahead and talk about that article and what you found for doing a lot of that like VM type stuff on M1.
Yeah, so that's the main thing I sort of needed to figure out to move to the MacBook Air, the M1 MacBook Air full time. Really is getting Docker set up. And initially, my plan was actually to sort of attach a Raspberry Pi to it, because I couldn't think of a better way of getting that up and running. And I should preface this: my only need for Docker on the Mac at this time is really just running Postgres. So
same here. So right, what I've ended up doing, I gave up and just installed Postgres with Homebrew.
Yeah,
which it's fine. Because if I need to destroy the database and start over, I can do that. But yeah, there's a lot of convenience to Docker, just being able to like spin up a machine, a brand new Docker instance anytime.
Yeah. You just never have that worry that you've left something behind.
Right.
And
right,
even
exactly.
if you have, it's very easy to get rid of everything and just reset and start from a clean slate. And we have like makefile targets where we can just do make db reset that are portable, right? I mean, Dave can run it and I can run it, and we know it works the same way on both our machines, and the only requirement is to have Docker. And thanks to doing this bit of extra setup, I was actually able to still use that process now on the M1. And that's why Docker is really useful. And it's even worth paying the bit of extra performance that you're maybe losing versus a native Postgres instance on your machine itself.
Hey folks, I wanted to talk to you again about AppFigures. You probably already know them about their analytics and their App Store optimization. AppFigures really is about giving app makers the tools they need to get more downloads and revenue. Well, now AppFigures can help you track competitors, from how many downloads they're getting and how much money they're making, to their audience demographics and which SDKs they use. Their competitor intelligence really gives you great context. Say a competitor adds like a new feature or was mentioned in the news recently. With AppFigures, you can see if that brought in more downloads right away. Got a great idea for an app or a game? Well, with AppFigures, you can figure out how big that market is and how much money you could be making with it. And that's just scratching the surface. Whether you're growing your app or building a new one, AppFigures has the tools you need that will reduce the risk but also get you more downloads. You don't need a large budget or a data science degree to do this kind of thing. AppFigures has made it affordable and simple. On top of tools, AppFigures also provides a lot of great guides and tutorials to take you step by step through gaining more visibility with ASO and increasing your revenue by learning from your competitors. They just released a free guide on that, actually. So go ahead, head to the link in the show notes and try AppFigures for free. If you like it, use our special code EMPOWER3030 to get 30% off for the next 3 months. Thank you, AppFigures, for sponsoring our show. Yeah, so in your article, you talk about, and we talked about this previously, the virtualization framework that a lot of these projects, Simple VM, the VF tool, things like that, that I've actually started like dabbling in when I've had what little spare time I've had, about like setting up the different images, the VM Linux image, the kernel image, all that stuff. And how has that worked out for you?
It's worked great. I mean, that's what I'm using day in and out to run the tests. Now, beyond those two articles, I've progressed a little because the downside of the setup as described there, it's booting off a live CD, and then you install Docker. But the minute you shut down that VM, because it's all in RAM, in this virtual machine's RAM, the minute you shut that down, you have to redo it, right? Mm-hmm. That's the way that works as described there. But I've since moved to having a real VM that can be shut down and relaunched, so it's persisting its file system. I still need to write that up. I have it on my to-do list to write a follow-up to describe that process. It's not super involved, but it takes a couple of extra steps to get that up and running.
Yeah, I've started really dabbling into that virtualization framework and creating my own like hard drive file and things like that. So is it more like a virtual box than it is a Docker? Like the virtualization's a little bit more higher level?
I mean, this process, as I'm running it right now, is simply running a virtual machine via the virtualization
I see.
framework.
Yeah, and then you install Docker on the virtual machine. Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah. That makes total sense then. Okay.
Which is exactly how Docker for Mac works. I mean, you just don't see it, right? I mean, Docker for Mac is under the hoods using that same, I think it's using the exact same virtualization framework. It used to use VirtualBox to do that, but they've moved away from that a while back. But the reason Docker for Mac is a bit more difficult to use as opposed to a Linux machine is for that reason. Like, for instance, on a Linux machine, you can, if you want to inspect files that you have in a Docker volume, you can do a Docker inspect and look at the path that you have shown, and then you, on the Linux machine's file system, that's the path. On the Mac, that isn't the case because it's the path in the virtual machine that you're running. So it's not your Mac's path. So it's a bit harder on the Mac to get at those files because you're one step removed. You're running that in a virtual machine itself, whereas on Linux, it's running on the machine.
So I'm looking it up. So they use HyperKit for their VM, it sounds like, instead of VirtualBox. But yeah, basically it's the same. It's like you said, it's running for VM, and then from inside that VM, it's running Docker. Okay, that's interesting. Yeah. I never knew that. Yeah, I joined the Docker, what do you call it? Pre-release, whatever, and I believe it still needs Rosetta. I am avoiding installing Rosetta. I think that's not the smartest move, but I'm trying to like avoid it on my new Mac, and it seems to be working pretty well. But yeah, one of the big problems was Docker, just getting that up and running. But I'll definitely take a look at this article and see if I can figure out how to do it myself with the virtualization framework.
I'd recommend it because I've tried the Docker preview as well, and it's a lot slower. It's a factor of 2 slower than the normal process, which is already slower than running it this way. So unless recent versions have changed a lot, you're leaving a lot of performance on the table if you use the preview.
So we've got a whole new year ahead of us. What are you looking forward to as far as improving the Swift package index?
Yeah, we've got quite a few things planned. We just shipped the READMEs. I think this was in December. And we've got more changes to the package page planned. In fact, just this morning, Dave has showed me a preview of what he's been tinkering with. That's really nice because just adding the README sort of is the first step. But there's a bit of rejiggering that we can do on that page to make it nicer.
Oh, it's really beautiful. I like it a lot. I'm just looking at one of my packages right now. Well done.
Yeah, Dave, I think that looks fantastic, Dave. And James has also helped us with that setup, rendering the markdown. And I think it looks really great. And I can say that because I had no hand in it.
Now, are you using Sundell's library for converting that markdown over, or are you using something else?
Initially we did, but because markdown pages on GitHub
plot, right?
Yeah, we tried that, but the GitHub pages use a lot of the GitHub markdown extensions. So that we lost a few things. So instead we're using a C library that renders the GitHub markdown flavor, and that gave us a lot better results. So right now we're using 2 different markdown renderers for that reason, but we might consolidate that at some point. Then we're looking to have a better search landing page. So right now when you search, you get the drop down with the results. We want to make that a bit better so that you can, maybe even pass around links to searches. Also, like DuckDuckGo could then be pointed to it and have little, those little DuckDuckGo commands where you can, the bangs that you can use with DuckDuckGo to search for packages and then land on search result pages. We're looking to add categories via various mechanisms, categories or keywords, also to improve search. Some other metadata file extensions, and by metadata file, I mean that SPI YAML file, to give package authors more control over how their packages display and what they display.
Now, how is that working alongside the internal Swift package team? Because I know that we've had a lot of discussions about metadata, and package.swift doesn't really contain a lot of metadata right now, and I know there's discussions about improving that. How is that working side by side with the internal team?
I think there's sort of agreement that some things just shouldn't be in the package.swift file. It's sort of this is the build recipe, whereas there are other pieces of information that aren't really related to the build, but more to the package, if that makes sense. And I think we are sort of in the place where that becomes apparent because we are interested in those extra bits about the package. I mean, who the authors are or what the package homepage isn't really relevant to the build system, but that's relevant to what we do. So I think there's discussions to be had that this should sit in a separate file. A format to be discussed. I think you can spend years discussing what that should look like. We just picked something that sort of works for us now. And, we're happy to evolve that, but we needed a solution for the issues we discussed earlier around the watchOS, targets and the Linux images. And that's what we're using. And we might continue to expand on that or follow up with something different if there are compelling reasons to do so. But our understanding is that this isn't conflicting with anything else that's happening there. And we're just taking, for now, the pragmatic approach of needing a solution, and it seems to be working.
Yeah, that sounds like a really good idea. I'm doing some JavaScript stuff lately, and just like packages.json file is just, there is so much like extra crap, I'll just say, in those node files that just aren't really necessary. And I'm glad that like we're looking at keeping that metadata separated from the package.swift file.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I mentioned it at the start. Arena integration is really something that I especially would like to get in there soon. Which
was the original reason you were brought onto the project.
Yeah, exactly. Not just for that reason, but I really think this is a great feature. We have a prototype of that, and I've been trying it, and I think it's really great to just have one click and have a package in a playground, and then play with it. I've actually extended Arena to allow package authors to embed a special file in their project that includes sample code, so that you not only get a package, a playground up with your package, but have that playground pre-populated with example code.
Wow.
So
awesome.
Users can actually, look at your package, click a button, get a playground, and then execute your package and its example code in a click. And I think that's really compelling. And Dave and I have been discussing this. There's quite a few UX things that we need to still sort out, but I'm just really excited about getting that.
What is the current status of Arena? I know at WWDC, they talked about package support in playgrounds, which was imperfect at best. What's kind of the position of Arena right now?
Well, it improved a lot with Xcode 12, because previously you often had the problem that Arena would create a playground and open it in Xcode. But then you'd have to relaunch Xcode to be able to actually run the playground properly. It had build errors unless you did. All of this seems to be fixed in Xcode 12. So the integration is actually now at a point where you could comfortably ship that feature, and it would actually work reliably with code completion working and everything sort of working automatically. And the key thing was there to, I think the setting is auto build the playground, and that sort of fixed all of these issues. So I think this is looking great, and it's a great companion to Xcode 12 and the package index.
Yeah, if you have not looked at Arena, you should definitely give it a shot. It's a fantastic project by Sven. I'll provide a link in the show notes, but it's a great way to like test out a Swift package and figure out how it works. It's fantastic.
Thanks.
So before we close out, I wanted to ask you, what are you most looking forward to in 2021?
I'm just going to stick to tech here because I think we all look forward to leaving a lot of what 2020 has brought behind.
Yes.
Just on a tech side, I'm super excited about Apple Silicon. I've been using my MacBook Air for I think 2 months now, and from the first day, I haven't looked back at my 15-inch MacBook Pro. It is like, I don't think I've ever switched so fast to a new machine and had that level of return. The only thing that compares is switching to SSD from spinning disk.
Yeah.
Like 10 years ago.
Yep.
And this is, the word that keeps popping in my head is immediate. And it isn't just that tests run twice as fast on this thing. Everything is fast, the switching resolutions, windows popping up, opening apps. It's just immediate. That's the thing. And I'm really, really excited about what's next to come here, because it seems like, or I think it's fairly obvious, this was the low end switch, right? Next, we'll see the Pro switch, which is the Pro laptops and the iMacs. And then I suppose maybe next year, 22, we'll see the high end being switched. So I think this is like a three-step switch. And I'm really looking forward to see, like, for instance, a 14-inch MacBook Pro, a 16-inch MacBook Pro. I think that's awfully exciting. What's to come there?
I couldn't agree with you more when it comes to the tech stuff. Yeah. And that's a really great segue to our next episode. I'm going to have Guy Rambo, and we're actually going to be talking about the M1 or M1 machines, and I'll give my full review on my MacBook Air. Spoiler alert, it's awesome. Surprising. So we'll talk about that in the next episode, about my thoughts on Apple Silicon and my new laptop and how that's gone. But yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. Anything else before we close out?
Just WWDC, I guess. I mean, I think we're all excited about this as developers every year. I think next year or this year is going to be another interesting one with especially the recent push from Apple releasing open source packages. I think we'll probably see quite a few more Swift SDKs, maybe something like Swift UI core data related, core data in the same way that Swift UI works, maybe more server-side Swift stuff. And then async await on the Swift side. I think it's going to be really exciting this summer.
I think there's going to be a lot of talks about async await at DubDub this year. Yeah. Do you think it's going to be in person, or do you think we're going to stick with doing remote?
No, I can't see this being remote yet. No way.
You don't think that the conference will be remote?
Sorry. No, it's definitely going to be remote. I can't see this being in person. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's way too soon for that. And I think we're going to see a lot of conferences stick with that route.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, that's kind of a downer note to end the episode on, but eventually we'll do in-person conferences, hopefully. Well, thank you so much, Sven, for coming on the show. Where can people find you?
I think the best place is on Twitter. I'm _SA_S. So just my initials with underscores sprinkled in, or my webpage, finestructure.co.
Yep. And we'll have links to that in the show notes, as well as the link to the Swift package index and some of the stuff we've talked about today. Thank you again.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
People can find me on Twitter at LeoGDion. My company is Bright Digit. Please take some time to post a positive review at Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're listening. Thank you so much for joining us, and I look forward to talking about my new MacBook in our next episode. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.